Okay, hopefully the slide will pop up now. There we go. Okay. I'm going to read most of the text, so if you can't see it, if it's too small on your phone, I will read the text. Okay, so the first prophet we're going to be looking at is the prophet Hosea. He was coming from the time of about 800 BC, so 800 years before the time of Christ. And the time of his prophecy was slightly before the destruction of Israel, and where he, and then also becomes a witness to this destruction. One of the things we must remember is that oftentimes these kingdoms or these areas had different names. So if you're going to read the book of Hosea, he sometimes calls Israel Ephraim or Jacob. I just remember that because it can get confusing. So before I start reading, I need to give you a disclaimer. Now, the prophets, the way they lived, how they preached, their messages are sometimes quite, let's just say, like rough in the sense that they're not trying to, they oftentimes through an act or through a stern warning, they are trying to bring the people back to repentance or to teach them something about God. And so Hosea is a great example of this. Hosea is a famous prophet for marrying a prostitute, and we're going to read about this now. And there's a whole meaning behind it. But the wording, I think this is a New King James version. The wording can sound quite rough, but just bear with me as I read the text. Okay, it's a really fascinating story, and the life of Hosea really has something to do with us as well in our relationship with God. So God now calls Hosea to his prophecy, and what he does is he calls him to enter into a marriage with a woman called Gomer. And there's discussion, a debate whether she was a harlot or unfaithful before or after the marriage. Either way, we do know that she left into adultery, basically. So let's read how the book of Hosea begins. The word of the Lord that came unto Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. So those are the names of the kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. The beginning of the word of the Lord by Hosea. And the Lord said to Hosea, Go take unto thee a wife of whoredoms, and children of whoredoms. So it's kind of like, maybe in English would call it like bastard children, right? That are conceived outside of marriage. For the land hath committed great whoredom, departing from the Lord. So this gives you an indication why God has commanded Hosea to do this, because Israel herself, as a nation that entered into a covenant with God, has now also has basically entered into harlotry or adultery. And this is a very important message, because what is this revealing to Hosea is that God sees his relationship with his people as a covenantal relationship, a spousal relationship between husband and wife. Which means that he's not looking for a legalistic relationship, right, where you follow the laws and then everything will be fine with you. He is calling the people together as a nation to be espoused to him and to enter into a relationship of love, you see, and faithfulness to one another, right? What is the covenant? The essence of the covenant is that the people should worship the one true God only, and not turn towards other gods, right? And be unfaithful to the one true God. And so every time they break this, they're breaking this marriage agreement. And so now Hosea becomes an image of God in his marriage, and Gomer becomes an image of Israel and Judah, who have been unfaithful by entering into idolatry. So now it speaks about how the family and the children that are begotten from this marriage become a kind of symbol of how Israel has basically been unfaithful. to God, and how the children become these kind of symbols of what's going to happen to the Israelites. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblim, which conceived and bare him a son. So she had a child. And the Lord said unto him, Hosea, call his name Jezreel, which means God sows. For yet a little while I will avenge the blood of Jezreel upon the house of Jehu, and will cause to cease the kingdom of the house of Israel. And it shall come to pass at that day that I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. So God is saying that he will now avenge the house of Jehu. Remember, Jehu was a ruler who was unfaithful to the Lord and committed great iniquity. So now God is going to bring judgment upon the house of Jehu. And she conceived again, so now his wife had another child and bare a daughter. And God said unto him, call her name Loruhamah, for I will no more have mercy upon the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away. But I will have mercy upon the house of Judah, and will save them by the Lord their God. Yet the Nuant will not save them by bow, nor by sword, nor by battle, by horses or by horsemen. So here comes a prophecy. God is saying that he will allow, there will be no more mercy on Israel. Israel, this kingdom will fall, but God will have mercy on the house of Judah, which is where Jerusalem was, and he will save them by the Lord their God. So they will be saved by God and not by military power. And that's a prophecy of Christ, of course, that ultimately God will save Judah through the Messiah and not through a worldly Messiah that will just muster up an army and drive away the forces and the kingdoms coming to attack and destroy Israel and Jerusalem. And this is, of course, the Assyrian Empire at this particular moment. So what's really also to me fascinating is that God is using this image of Hosea's family, even the names that is given to them, as a kind of prophecy. And we see how interesting that when we look at the history of our salvation and the biblical history, God often condenses his relationship, and he begins his kind of covenantal relationship with a family, right? The family of Abraham, the family of Noah, etc., etc. We see it begins with a family. Patriarch Abraham begets children that become, how can I say, that then unfolds into this nation that is called to be faithful to God, and some fall away and some remain faithful. And so God is able to, first of all, we should take this as seeing how God wants us to have a relationship with him, like within a family. And even when we look at in the time of the coming of the Messiah and Jesus Christ, again, God begins the salvation through a family, through a single person, right? The Virgin Mary, the Theotokos. Again, everything unfolds, right, from a family, right? Not from even scripture, right? Scriptures are the stories of these families, right? He begins by leading a family out into towards God, and then through that family, salvation comes to the world. So that's another way we should see the Church of God, the Holy Orthodox Church, as a family, right? And that's very important because when we later on going to talk about intercession of saints and all these things, it makes more sense when we understand that we're connected together as one family. Okay. So now Hosea's wife leaves him. She goes into adultery. We're going to read about it. So now God is speaking to Hosea. Say ye unto your brethren, and unto your sisters, Ruhamah, plead with your mother, plead, for she is not my wife, neither am I her husband. Let her therefore put away her whoredoms out of her sight, and her adulteries from between her breasts, lest I strip her naked and set her as in the day that she was born, and make her as a wilderness, and set her like a dry land, and slay her with thirst. So let her. He's saying, Hosea is saying, let her stop from being a harlot, or I'm going to basically strip her of all the things that are going to sustain her. Right? I'm going to just set her out into the wilderness. And I will not have mercy upon her children, for they be the children of whoredoms. For their mother hath played the harlot. She that conceived them hath done shamefully. For she said, I will go after my lovers, that give me my bread and my water, my wool and my flax, mine oil and my drink. Therefore, behold, I will hedge up the way with thorns, and make a wall that she shall not find her paths. And she shall follow after her lovers, but she shall not overtake them. And she shall seek them, but shall not find them. Then shall she say, I will go and return to my first husband, for then it was better with me than now. For she did not know that I gave her corn and wine and oil, and multiplied her silver and gold, which they prepared before Baal. So we must remember this image of um, the wife of Hosea leaving leaving him. She's leaving him for what? For lovers that are going to give her, right? It says her bread and her water, her wool and her flax, her oil and her drink. So now, why is God saying this to Hosea and showing her through his wife? Is that the people of Israel have done the exact same thing. When they look at the nations surrounding them, oh, but the Edomites are doing so well, their harvest was good. Let us set up idols to their gods because their gods are successful, right? And let us go to the Canaanite gods, because they're doing successful and whatever. And so the people were looking at the nations and emulating them and bringing in foreign gods to worship, maybe even together with Yahweh, the one true God. But they thought, well, this is going to garner more support. Um, Favor and even material wealth and goods, right? It sounds like today, really, where how people are unfaithful to the one true God, unfaithful through seeking after worldly pleasures and worldly things. Um, but then it ends with that God will actually, it says, she shall follow after her lovers, but she shall not overtake them, and she shall seek them, but shall not find them. Then she shall say, I will go and return to my first husband. So she'll realize, God will make her to realize that, in fact, the true goods that she has received all comes from her first husband, her one true love, right, which is the true God, and she will return back to him. And so God promises to bring her back from idolatry. So let's keep on reading. For I will take away the names of the Baalim out of her mouth, and shall no more be remembered by their name. And in that day will I make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field and with the fowls of heaven and with the creeping things in the ground, and I will break the bow and the sword and the battle out of the earth, and I will make them to lie down safely. And I will betroth thee unto me forever. Yea, I will betroth thee unto me in righteousness and in judgment and in loving kindness and mercies. So God is saying, Hosea, take back your wife, forgive her, remove from her all the Baals, the false gods from her mouth, and you're going to enter into a relationship of loving kindness and mercy forever. I will even betroth thee unto me in faithfulness, and thou shalt know the Lord. That's an important phrase, to know the Lord. And it shall come to pass in that day, I will hear, saith the Lord. I will hear the heavens, and they shall hear the earth. And the earth shall hear the corn and the wine and the oil, and they shall hear Jezreel. And I will sow her unto me in the earth, and I will have mercy upon her that hath not obtained mercy. And I will say to them which were not my people, Thou art my people, and they shall say, Thou art my God. So here's another prophecy about how God is going to even bring the nations, right? The people who were not his people have now become his people, it says, and they shall say, Thou art my God, to confess the one true God. So God has now planned this. Now, immediately when we read this, we can see how Jesus Christ was the one who did this, who betrothed the nations and the people back to him into a covenantal and spousal relationship. Remember, Christ himself speaks of himself as the bridegroom. And the story that comes to mind, is the story of Futini at the well, right? She has had, how many husbands did she had? Can someone tell me? The woman at the well, the Samaritan woman?
The Samaritan woman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she had five husbands, and the man she was with was not even her husband. So she becomes this image when Christ, the bridegroom, comes to the earth incarnate. God comes incarnate, and he comes to this woman. Now, remember, she was also a Samaritan, right? Samaritans at the time of Christ were those from Samaria, the fallen kingdom of Israel. The people there, the Samaritans, had mingled heresy and mingled false belief with the true belief, right? So they were the epitome of like adulterers in a way, right? Not being faithful to Yahweh. So Jesus Christ comes to her now and pulls her back to him. And we've said this many times before, the well is the place of a marriage, of the meeting of a couple. So now Jesus Christ, in a sense, betroths himself to her, calling her to the Christ, to the Messiah. And the people, as we know, turn back to the one true God after Christ's preaching to them for those days that he was there. So he's a fulfillment of this image of Hosea's marriage, right? And so let's keep on reading. Now, how does Hosea receive her back? He first has to pay a ransom. He has to go and rescue her. She owes money. She is kind of held captive by her lovers, right? So let's keep on reading. Then said the Lord unto me, Go yet, love a woman beloved of her friend, yet an adulteress, according to the love of the Lord towards the children of Israel, who look to other gods, and love flagons of wine. So I bought her to me for 15 pieces of silver, and for an omer of barley, and a half omer of barley. And I said unto her, Thou shalt abide for me many days, thou shalt not play the harlot, and thou shalt not be for another man, for will I also be for thee. For the children of Israel shall abide many days without a king, and without a prince, and without a sacrifice, and without an image, and without an ephod, and without a teraphim. Afterwards shall the children of Israel return and seek the Lord their God, and David their king, and shall fear the Lord and his goodness in the latter days. So Hosea has to now go. This is obviously very poetical language. The way he writes about the story, it's not just like a narrative. He's writing it poetically, but he has to go buy her back, redeem her from her harlotry, and then it says, and love. And he says, love her like I love Israel, and I'm willing to forgive them and bring them back. And then he even says, there'll be a time when they are without a prince, without a king, but then they'll return back to the fear of the Lord, back to faithfulness. And this is really the story of every one of us in a way, where we call to be faithful in our relationship with God, to not turn towards sin, to not turn towards idolatry in whatever manifestation it can be. We shouldn't think that in a kind of cliche way that you're only an idolater if you have little statues of Canaanite gods in your house or something. Idolatry can be the worship, the giving of oneself to anything. It can be to money, to seeking out worldly comfort, pleasure. It can be even seeking out praise of men instead of being pleasing to God. Because oftentimes, to be pleasing to God and to be faithful to God actually requires us to be scorned by men and by the world, by our colleagues or whatever it may be. And so it's very important. But we see how God actively comes to redeem Israel from idolatry. And this again is, and the consequences of it, right? Because being an adulterous person, one is held captive to one's sin, right? One is not free to act as they will. And so we even see the act of Christ being crucified and entering into Hades, the place of death, and lifting up uh, those held by death as an act of paying the ransom, right? Of freeing one from this consequences of sin, right? Which is why I have this icon here of Christ lifting up Eve, right, from the grave. It's the same act, except Christ now has done it in a deeper sense of that, in a fuller sense of redemption. One of the things I wanted to point out in the work of Hosea, we see the word how the Lord wants the children of Israel to know the Lord. So this is one of the quotes. Hear the word of the Lord, ye children of Israel, for the Lord hath a controversy with the inhabitants of the land, because there is no truth, nor mercy, nor knowledge of God in the land. So they do not know. The Hebrew word yada, or ginosko in Greek, is actually a very intimate word, right? We know in the Bible the euphemism for like sexual relation is actually to know someone, right? You know, it says when it speaks about a husband and wife, it says whatever. Isaac knew Rebecca, right? And it's a very broad term, but it includes intimacy. And so God, when he speaks in the book of Hosea and other books, he's speaking about how our relationship with God should be intimate, should be personal, should be a deep, powerful relationship, just like it should be just like it is in a marriage, right? An intimate marriage. And I think that's something very important as well for us as Christians, is that God doesn't seek us to be keepers of the law. God seeks us to enter into a spousal relationship where we want to be with God because we love Him, not because we're afraid or because we um, want some kind of reward or something. But it's a relationship that one delights to be in, right? And even in things like the Song of Solomon, right, which is a song of love between Christ and the church. It's a song that uses the imagery of two lovers in a garden, right? And that's so fitting because, right, where was man perfectly intimate with God and in perfect relationship with Him? In paradise, in the garden, right? And so this is the image that we receive. And that's why I love these Persian miniature paintings. There's a whole theme of two kind of lovers in the garden. It's a very kind of beautiful image. And it's actually an image of us being in paradise with God. One of the things that we find in the book of Hosea, which is very interesting, is that Hosea notices among the people that they are putting away their wives. The men are putting away their wives. So in divorce, basically. And we do know that the Mosaic law gave some provision for this to give a paper of divorce, and you could divorce your wife. And he notices this pattern is actually connected to idolatry. Um, so let me read it quickly for you from Hosea, and then we can discuss it a bit. So Judah hath dealt treacherously, and an abomination is committed in Israel and in Jerusalem. For Judah has profaned the holiness of the Lord which he loved, and hath married the daughter of a strange god. The Lord will cut off the man that doeth this, the master and the scholar out of the tabernacles of Jacob, and him that offereth an offering unto the Lord of hosts. And this have ye done again, covering the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping and with crying out, insomuch that he regardeth not the offering any more, or receiveth it with good will at your hand. Yet we say, wherefore? Because the Lord hath been witness between thee and the wife of thy youth, against whom thou hast dealt treacherously. Yet is she thy companion, and the wife of thy covenant. And did not he make one? Did ye have the residue of the Spirit? And wherefore one? That he might seek a godly seed. Therefore take heed to your spirit, and let none deal treacherously against the wife of his youth. For the Lord the God of Israel saith that he hateth putting away. So that means God is saying he hates divorce, putting away of one's wife. For one covereth violence with his garments, saith the Lord of hosts. Therefore take heed to your spirit, that ye deal not treacherously. So one of the things that we often see in Scripture, the Lord speaks about the wife of or the husband of your youth. Now remember the people of the ancient world married very young. So young men would be probably not more than 18 years old, and women would probably be in their teens when they would get married. Oftentimes the men were slightly older. Um, and there was a kind of sociological problem at that time where men would seek after other wives having grown tired or whatever of the woman of their youth, the wife of their youth, and also with the woman as well. And so God was uses as an image saying, you must love the wife of your youth and stay with them, faithful to them forever, for your whole life. Um, because she's your first and true love. That's basically the kind of message. Um, and so we see how there's a continuity with the prophets, with the Old Testament, with the teaching of Christ, because we remember Christ himself also called out the people of that time, and I'll read this scripture from you now from Matthew, that um, there should not be divorce, right? Um, only save for adultery. But divorce in itself is not something that is really allowed, right? In the fulfillment of what a relationship should really be. Okay. So one of the other kind of conclusions we get from the book of Hosea, what God is trying to teach him, is that even though the people have committed adultery, have moved away from God, have worshipped other gods, uh, and God has every right to divorce, right? To end the covenant because they have themselves broken the agreement, right? The marriage agreement, they have broken it. God could easily and justifiably say, I no longer have a covenant with these people because they've turned away from me. But God says in the end, just like Hosea with Gomer, he will forgive her, redeem her, and bring her back to himself because his love is greater than the people's sin. And that's the gospel, right? God's love is so great that even though the people have turned away and rejected him, he will bring them back to him. And that's Christ, the bridegroom, right? Here's an image of the bridegroom that we have during the final week, Passion Week, leading up to Pascha, the great feast in the Orthodox Church. We actually call it the bridegroom services, where Christ is now the bridegroom coming to save his bride, to bring his bride back, the church, and us personally back into a perfect relationship, even though we have rejected him. What does Christ say? Let's read quickly from Matthew's Gospel. I really like this painting, actually. It's Christ the bridegroom. I can't remember the exact image. It's the parable of the virgins who come to the wedding feast, right? So let's read quickly. Some Pharisees came to him, to Jesus, now this is the New Testament, the Gospel of Matthew. To test him, they asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? Because that's what people were doing at the time of Jesus. And they're doing today, for sure. Haven't you read, he replied, that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and his mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two but one flesh. Therefore what God has joined together, let no one separate. Why then, they asked, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away, or put her away, right? Jesus replied, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard. But it was not this way from the beginning. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another woman commits adultery. So Christ is very clear on his teaching about marriage. Why? Because our marriage needs to reflect the marriage between God and his church and his people. It is one with one spouse, and it's faithful, right? And to the end, and to the ages of ages. So when the world turns to unfaithfulness, it's and enters into divorce, it's a kind of an act of it's an act of idolatry in a way, right? And how interesting is it that, as at least we should say in the post-Christian world of the West, right, in America and Europe and everywhere really, as people have moved away from faithfulness to God, look how marriages have kind of started to crumble. How the divorce rate has exponentially skyrocketed, right? I mean, we are ourselves the children of many divorced couples, right? And so there's this great hurt and pain among the people because we have lost, let's just say, the image of a faithful spouse, whether it's our parents or grandparents who have entered into the divorce. Um, so, and society, as society marriages break apart, so we enter into idolatry. It's like this never-ending cycle, right? That they kind of complement one another. The people move further and further away from the true God. They are worshiping. Sorry, I got lost there. Can you guys hear me? Am I back? Okay, sorry about that. So this is something very important. So what can we do? What is the solution? Well, the solution is exactly the same as what the prophets were teaching, Prophet Hosea, and Christ is teaching, is that we need to return back to the bridegroom, to Christ, as our example, as one who is faithful. And it's a difficult thing, but Hosea was faithful to God, and he even endured seeing his wife leave him into adultery, but he remained faithful to become an image of God. So we have to become radical in our monogamy, radical in our marriages, in the sense that we will be faithful to the end, just like God is faithful to us. So that's what we should take from this book and what we see in Christ, right? Christ was faithful unto death, right? So that he may redeem his bride by shedding his blood for even his by that's why it says in the marriage service in Orthodoxy, well, from the words of Paul, um, uh, that husbands should love their wives just as Christ loved the church, and they should be willing to give their life for their bride, right? To die for them, just like Christ died for the church. So this is something that we should take to redeem society, to redeem this terrible idolatry and divorce that we see everywhere, right? Okay. Another saint that came to mind, one of my favorite saints, is Saint Catherine of Alexandria. And her troparion that we sing to her, because it shows that although the book of Hosea is speaking about God as the bridegroom and Israel, the people of God, as the bride, every one of us also enters into a very personal relationship with God as a spousal relationship. So it's a broader relationship between heaven and earth, we could say it like that, but also between us personally and God. And we see this in the lives of the saints. So just to give you a rough kind of summary of Saint Catherine. Saint Catherine lived in Alexandria in the I think it was the 5th or 4th century. She was a Christian, and she was extremely wise. She was highly educated, but educated also in the Christian faith. So not just philosophically and whatever else. And she was a beautiful aristocratic woman that attracted many admirers. But she said that she could never find a bridegroom as worthy as Christ, right? As great as Christ, could be greater than Jesus Christ. So she chose not to marry. And this infuriated those who were suitors. And she even invited philosophers to come and challenge her on her faith and what she believed and her wisdom, basically. And no one could defeat her. In fact, most of the people that came to her in the end gave their life to Christ. And so she was killed. She was martyred, right, on the wheel, torture. But she remained a faithful bride to Christ. She wedded herself to Christ, the true bridegroom. And we see this with all the saints, really. So let me read just the first troparion of St. Catherine to give an idea. By your virtues, as with rays of the sun, you enlightened the pagan sages, and like the brightest moon for those who walk at night, you drove away the darkness of unbelief and led the empress to faith. You also rebuked the tyrants, and you were called by God as his bride. O blessed Catherine. With love you ascended to the heavenly bridal chamber of the most comely bridegroom Christ, by whom you were crowned with a royal crown. Now standing before him with the angels, pray for us who honor your holy memory. What a beautiful troparion. Let me read the Kontakia. Let us hymn the godly Catherine, the all-praised bride of Christ, the guardian of Sinai, our helper and defender. For brilliantly has she silenced the boasting of the impious with the sword of the Spirit. And now crowned as a martyr, she entreats great mercy for all. So she becomes a perfect example of bride of Christ. Okay. Hopefully I'm still here. Sorry, my internet's a bit bad. Let's move on to the prophet Micah. Micah came from about the time of Isaiah. The southern kingdom was destroyed, and he was now warning that Israel and later Jerusalem would now be destroyed as well. So his message is one of impending destruction, that God will bring destruction upon the cities, but there is a hope. There is a hope that someone will come to redeem them, and not redeem them in the political sense, but redeem them in a fuller, more complete way, which is the Messiah, right? And what we now understand is Jesus Christ. So this is how Micah brings the message. This is how he begins his message. The word of the Lord that came to Micah of Moresheth during the reigns of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, the kings of Judah. The vision he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem. So he sees a vision now. Hear you peoples, all of you, listen, earth, and all you who live in it, that the sovereign Lord may bear witness against you. The Lord from his holy temple, judgment against Samaria and Jerusalem. So he's bringing judgment upon the two capitals of the kingdoms of the people of God. Look, the Lord is coming from his dwelling place. So the Lord dwells above, right? He comes down and treads on the heights of the earth. The mountains mount beneath him, and the valleys split apart, like wax before the fire, like water rushing down a slope. All this is because of Jacob's transgression, because of the sins of the people of Israel. What is Jacob's transgression? Is it not Samaria? What is Judah's high place? Is it not Jerusalem? So he's saying now that judgment is going to come on the kingdoms. And then he begins to actually call out the cities that are going to fall. And he's even saying what the people should be doing and what himself is going to do, because this is going to befall them. Because of this, I will weep and wail. I will go about barefoot and naked. I will howl like a jackal and moan like an owl. For Samaria's plague is incurable, and it has spread to Judah. So this plague of idolatry. It has reached the very gate of my people, even to Jerusalem itself, the holy city. Tell it not in Gath. Weep not at all in Beth Ophrah. Roll in the dust. Pass by naked and in shame, you who live in Shafir. So he's saying, do this because that's what the Assyrians are going to do to you. They're going to make you walk naked in shame by destroying your cities and taking you into captivity. Those who live in Maroth writhe in pain, waiting for relief, because disaster has come from the Lord, even to the gate of Jerusalem. You who live in Lachish, harness fast horses and to the chariots. You are where the sin of the daughter of Zion began, for the transgressions of Israel were found in you. So what's really interesting is that we have a kind of parallel in the prophecy of Micah and in an extra biblical source, which were the actual writings of the Assyrian emperor Sennacherib, who destroyed Israel and destroyed the city surrounding Jerusalem. And this is actually one of the tablets that describe how he destroyed the cities, the various cities. And in it we have this particular city, Lachish, mentioned. And I'm going to show you an amazing archaeological discovery that shows the horrors of the destruction of these cities and how great judgment came upon these cities. So what we know is that in the year 700 BC, before Christ, this Assyrian emperor Sennacherib invaded, subdued the coastal territory. So if we look at Israel, would be where Gaza is basically, down into Egypt. he stopped the Egyptian army, and then the Israelites were not, and the Judeans were not paying tax to him. So he came and destroyed their cities and brought judgment to them. And the only place that he didn't destroy at that particular time was Jerusalem, because it was heavily fortified, and King Hezekiah survived. So one of the parts of, and we read about this in 2 Kings, but we also read it in the Assyrian writings, and this is what it says in the Assyrian writings. It says that as the Assyrian army then advanced surrounding the city, as for him Hezekiah, Sennacherib is saying, I confined him inside the city Jerusalem, his royal city, like a bird in a cage. I set up blockades against him and made him dread, exiting his city gates. Now we have more than this. In fact, in the palace of Sennacherib, there's a relief that was made, that was carved, to celebrate the victories of Sennacherib, the Assyrians, against the various cities. And one of these reliefs actually depicts the destruction of Lachish, one of the great cities surrounding Jerusalem. It was quite a small city in our understanding, but it was a fortified city that was very important to protect Jerusalem. And the Hebrews, the Jews, lived in this city, and they defended it, but they ultimately lost against the Assyrians. And so this is a drawing of the relief, but you can actually go see this relief. If you go to the British Museum, most people walk right past it, but it's actually a depiction of a biblical event. Shows how this is the fortified city here. If you can see my my little arrow, this is the people, the Judeans, fighting against the Assyrians, now ascending this hill, trying to destroy them. But it's got various other depictions, right? It depicts them conquering them. Here we have the people being taken into captivity, the women and children. We have the men being impaled. It's very, very violent, actually. And it's true to what actually they did to all the people. Very, very violent way of dying. And on the site, so this is actually the site of Lachish. But they found these are projectiles that were shot with slingshots trying to fight the army. They found many weapons under the rubble, still to this day. And this is a battle that took place 2,700 years ago. Here we see the actual relief that you can see in the British Museum. Here are the people being taken into captive, being led back to Assyria, and the armies of the Assyrians coming and destroying them. So let me read a little bit so you can just get an idea of this type of battle. There's evidence of fierce burning at the level of the Assyrian invasion. So when they uncovered the soil underneath, they found the whole layer was burnt, which means they burnt the city to the ground. Arrowheads, sling stones, and the crest of an Assyrian helmet offer only hints of the tumult and destruction highlighted in the Assyrian frieze. So this is the Assyrian frieze. The people inside these walls must have been terrified, perhaps huddling in the palace complex that still sits just to the left inside the gate complex, perhaps in what might have been a spin-off sanctuary of the temple in Jerusalem. So some of these cities had little temples. Priests performed desperate rituals in hope of divine intervention. The residents were right to be afraid, for gruesome fates awaited captives of Assyria. It was one of the most violent empires of history. They were uprooted, tortured, led away with bags over their heads, with limbs lopped off, with rings in their noses or lips. The stone relief of Lachish conquest shows the exile of prisoners as vividly as the battle itself. This is what we see here. So it was really a frightening thing, and this the Bible describes as the judgment of God upon the people for being unfaithful, and He leads them away. What's really fascinating is they even found in the site, they found little what's called ostraca, which is basically little fragments of pottery where they would write notes. So here the Hebrews are writing, the Jews are writing on these things messages, and this is the one they found. It says this. It's quite amazing to find. It's like something from Lord of the Rings. They're in this battle and they're waiting for some kind of relief. It says, "Let my Lord know that we are watching over the beacon of Lachish. a beacon, this is a city, it was a beacon, according to the signals which my Lord gave, for Azekah is not to be seen. And interestingly, in the book of Jeremiah, which is another prophet, they even speak about these two cities holding out against the Assyrians, right? Jeremiah says this: while the army of the king of Babylon was fighting against Jerusalem and the other cities of Judah that were still holding out, Lachish and Azekah, these were the only fortified cities left in Judah. So we see how the biblical story correlates to the evidence found on these places. Now, this is the site. In fact, this rubble here is actually from the battle. The Assyrians built a ramp of earth to get their chariots up to the city walls. So you can actually see this to this day if you go to Israel. Now, all of this violence and all of this tumult, what does it mean? Why did God allow this to happen to the people? It was, of course, his judgment upon the people. He allowed them to be taken into captive. But through this chaos, in a way, it's kind of like God allowing the potter is now breaking down his pot in order to fashion something new and better. Because God wanted there to be established not a kingdom that was corrupt, idolatrous, and evil, but an eternal kingdom with the one true king, which was the Christ, the Messiah. And so by allowing this destruction to happen, he's also allowing for there to be established a new true king that was faithful to God, let's just say. And so even in the book of Micah, we see this promise given to us. So this is what some of the messianic prophecies are that we see in this book. It says this: I will surely gather all of you, Jacob. I will surely bring together the remnant of Israel. I will bring them together like sheep in a pen, like a flock in its pasture. The place will throng with people. The one who breaks open the way will go up before them. They will break through the gate and go out. The king will pass through before them, the Lord at their head. So we see an image of a shepherd, the new Messiah as a shepherd, right? And Christ himself identified as the good shepherd. He said that of himself. And it also says that he will lead the way up to the king, will lead the way before them. And this is exactly what Jesus Christ did. He led the way to paradise, right? Through passing even through death to life. So he is the true Messiah leading us to the true kingdom. I won't go through everything. But we see even in the book of Revelation now how the Messiah will enter into a kind of marriage. The bride, where heaven and earth will be united, and the bride will be married to, the Lamb will be married to his bride. And so we see these two images of the coming of the Messiah leading the people, but also the preparation of the true Jerusalem, the new Jerusalem being betrothed to the Messiah. So there's some more prophecies as well of messianic prophecies that we'll really recognize. I know we're running out of time, but one of them, of course, is the prophecy of the birth of the Messiah, of the Christ, which we read about in the Gospels. It quotes this, but this is from Micah. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be the ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old. How interesting is that? It even has this kind of hearkening that this king who will come to rule over Israel, his origins are from old. So he is before time, how we would understand that, from ancient times. Therefore Israel will be abandoned until the time when she who is in labor bears a son, and the rest of his brothers return to join the Israelites. He will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they will live securely, and then his greatness will reach to the ends of the earth. So how amazing is that prophecy? That in Bethlehem, although it is small, is insignificant as a city, from you will come the rule of Israel, from ancient of times or ancient of days, and until she who in labor bears a son, then all will return to him, and all nations will know the greatness of God. So through this small place, an insignificant birth, through that will come, all the nations will come to God. How amazing is that? Even the story of the Magi coming from the east is part of that prophecy. So we see that fulfilled, right? Obviously in the birth of Christ, and we will read this prophecy in the Nativity Vigil. So you must listen out at the Vigil of Nativity when we celebrate it from this prophecy. So it's quite amazing. Okay, we've got a couple more minutes, so I'll quickly just give you a couple of ideas from the prophet Malachi. Whoever's planning a family, amazing names for you to use: Malachi, Micah, Hosea. Anyway, now interesting thing about Malachi is that he wrote much later than the other prophets, in the sense that he already wrote after the people had already been, the cities had been destroyed, including Jerusalem. The people had been in exile in Babylon, but now they had been allowed back into Jerusalem, and they had reestablished the temple. But now what was the great problem was that the people had come back to the temple in Jerusalem, but the glory of the Lord was not there. They still saw corruption among the people, and so they were still longing for the Messiah. Although they were back, they were allowed to return back to the city, the holy city, they found that it was still lacking, right? And so Malachi comes and brings them his message. He says this: the burden of the word of the Lord to Israel by Malachi. So he already calls it a burden because it's not a message of praise of the people, it's a message of condemnation of them. I have loved you, saith the Lord, yet you say, wherein have you loved us? So God is saying, I have loved you, but you're saying, the people, where have we seen your love, right? But then God responds, and he says, was not Esau Jacob's brother, saith the Lord, yet I love Jacob. So he's saying he gave the birthright to Jacob. And I hated Esau, and laid his mountains and his heritage waste for the dragons of the wilderness. So what he's saying is that he gave Esau a bad inheritance and gave Jacob a better inheritance. Whereas Edom saith, we are impoverished, but we will return and build the desolate places, saith the Lord of hosts. They shall build, but I will throw down, and they shall call them the border of wickedness, and the people against whom the Lord hath indignation forever. So basically what this means, it's quite difficult to understand some of these prophecies, but the people are saying, we haven't seen your love, Lord. But God is reminding them that he has delivered them, he has given them a wonderful place to establish themselves, he's given them all these blessings, and yet they still see it as not being part of God's love. He's comparing them to Edom, who were the descendants of Esau, right? And how they have received a worse portion in life. But the Israelites are looking at them and saying, oh, well, look, they have so many nice things, right? So it's a kind of grass is green on the other side type of experience, right, of these people. Another thing that Micah calls the people, right, God tells, Malachi, is that the sacrifices they're offering at the temple, right? The temple has been reestablished, but the offerings that they're offering are not done from the purity of their heart, and they're not offering the best offerings to God. So this is what God says through Malachi. You offer polluted bread upon my altar. Remember now, in Jerusalem they were offering sacrifices. They were offering bread offerings or wheat offerings, grain offerings, incense. They were offering various animal offerings like lamb and oxen and things like this. And then the people say, wherein have we polluted thee? How can we say that? We offering our offerings. In that ye say, the table of the Lord is contemptible. And if you offer the blind for sacrifice, is it not evil? And if you offer the lame and sick, is it not evil? Offer it now unto thy governor. Will he be pleased with thee, or accept thy person, saith the Lord of hosts? So what was happening was the people, instead of offering the best lambs or the best rams or the best wheat, they're offering the worst. They would take the kind of crippled little lamb or the blind ox, and they would go offer that at the temple. And the priests themselves would accept those offerings. Now, we must remember that what was happening at the temple was not necessarily for God, right? God didn't require sacrifices for any kind of sustenance or something. He was testing the love of the people for him. If they would offer the best that they had to God. That's what sacrifice is, right? We offer the best of ourselves to God out of love, right? This is even from very early on, from the offering of Cain and Abel, right? God accepted Abel's offering because he gave it from a good place of his heart. Well, Cain did not. And so God is saying, why are you offering me the worst? And then he gives an interesting analogy. He says, for from the rising of the sun, even unto the going down of the same, my name shall be great among the Gentiles, and in every place incense shall be offered unto my name, and a pure offering. For my name shall be great among the heathen, said the Lord of hosts. So God here through Malachi is even prophesying and saying that you are offering me terrible offerings, the crippled and lame animals, but the heathen, the Gentiles, the nations will offer incense, which is prayers, a symbol of prayers, but incense to my name and a pure offering, because my name will be great among the Gentiles. And as Orthodox Christians, we see our worship, right? Because remember, of course, the majority of Christians are Gentiles that have been grafted onto the people of God. And now we offer worship to God in spirit and in truth. And so we offer God and we even offer incense, just like it says in Malachi 1:11, to the glory of his name. Right? Incense, when we offer incense in church, we are offering prayers and praise to God, and it's a symbol of that. But it's something that God, let's just say, ordains. It's not something that God does not want. God does not want us to offer incense not in the purity of heart and not to the glory of his name, but he wants us to offer incense to his glory, right? But ye have profaned it, he says, in that ye say, the table of the Lord is polluted, and the fruit thereof, even his meat, is contemptible. So remember the story of Jesus Christ when he went to the temple and the disciples were marveling at the beauty of the temple, how everyone had offered these amazing things. But Jesus Christ saw the widow who gave her last mite into the treasury, the last thing she had. That was all that she had. She gave her whole self in honor of God's holy temple. And he saw this as a great example. So, and as Orthodox Christians, I would say that this is something that is quite clear in the way that we worship. When we look at these beautiful churches, I put an example here, like this is the Annunciation Church in Moscow. It's you can see it's an offering of great devotion and love, right? In terms of the way it was designed, the way it was built, the beauty of the materials. It's an act of giving to God the best that we can, right? The best that an architect can possibly design. And it's a symbol of the love of people for their creator. Now, that was something that was very important to me when I became a Christian and we became an Orthodox Christian, because I was used to going to churches where the best is not offered to God. Often the best is offered to oneself. And I'll give you a good example of this. And excuse me for being a bit judgmental, because we also have lots to judge about, but be judged of. But so, for example, when you go to like a reformed, let's just say charismatic church, and you enter into the church, and you sit on a chair, what do you think the chair is made of? Can someone tell me? If you go to like like a charismatic church, and you sit. Sorry?
Wood.
Wood would be amazing. It's usually a little
Sometimes
plastic chair. Plastic. Yeah, thank you. Like those white plastic chairs, like you have at school or whatever. Now, there's nothing wrong with sitting on a plastic chair worshiping God. We should worship God wherever we are. But the same people going to that church, if you go to their house, most likely, if they had the choice, they probably would first buy themselves a nice, I don't know, wooden chair or one with cushions or a lazy boy or whatever it may be. But church will remain with those plastic chairs always. Now, someone might say, well, Father Nicholas, that's not fair. Like, God doesn't care about where you worship. But surely we should be offering to the glory of God the best that we have. And if you look at, I'll use an example of Ethiopia as a good example, which is an Orthodox Christian majority nation. Yes, albeit Oriental Orthodox, it's one of the poorest nations, let's just say, comparatively. Yet, if you look at the Orthodox churches there and the vestments, they're absolutely beautiful. The people give the best that they can for God, and you go to their houses and they don't even have chairs, they don't even have good clothes, but they're willing to give the best materials to the glory of God, not to the glory of the priests or to the glory of the building itself, but to the glory of God. And so, what I'm trying to say is that what we read in Malachi, how God is displeased with people offering kind of like the leftovers of God. And you see this even in Islam. In Islam, they have a similar thing to tithing, although it's slightly less percent. But I think more Muslims actually practice it than we practice tithing. And there's often comments how people give the worst percentage. So the Orthodox Church in general, from what I can say, has maintained this admonition that we should offer God the best things we have, which is why at least we try in our best capacity to offer what is right and fitting towards God. So, for example, people say, why is the chalice that we use for Holy Communion a gold chalice? Right? Isn't that a bit too fancy? Jesus didn't use a gold chalice. He was, they were quite poor, and the Last Supper surely wasn't a gold chalice. And it surely wasn't. It was probably a clay or a wooden chalice, right? But we believe that the chalice holds the very body and blood of Christ. And what is the fitting vessel of the most precious, let's just say, presence of God is gold, right? A gold chalice. So actually, it makes more sense what we're doing than trying to kind of LARP in a way to being the apostles, right? You often hear that kind of criticism, like, oh, the apostles never looked like that. When you see a bishop or something in Orthodoxy that's dressed all nicely during the liturgy, the apostles never looked like that. Well, they didn't outwardly, but inwardly they were clothed with the beautiful grace of God, right? And so we try to reflect that. So I would say that the Orthodox Church has continued in the spirit of Malachi and what God was showing them that they should offer the best. I'll give you one more example before we close tonight. So during what's called the Liturgia, during a vigil service, there's a moment where the priest blesses, or the bishop, if he's present, blesses oil, wheat, and wine. And I was serving at a church in Moscow. I was a deacon, and one of the altar helpers, they have different types of oil, right? Olive oil, sunflower oil, whatever. Now, the oil that's placed on this kind of plate to be blessed should really be olive oil. But for whatever reason, they thought the one altar service had, let's just put in regular oil, not the best olive oil, as a kind of, because no one knows and it's just a little cup, whatever. And what happened was, so this was actually just me being clumsy, but it was interpreted by the people, by the priests and the altar service. So when I picked up to lift up the cover of the oil, so for some reason the cup stuck to it and the whole oil spilled everywhere. And it was a very embarrassing moment for me because I was like this new deacon from South Africa. My Russian wasn't so good. And then I spilled oil in the middle of the service, literally, on everywhere, like on the floor. And it was really embarrassing. Everyone had to quickly come and clean it up and everything. And I felt so bad and I was so embarrassed. And after the service, I was like saying, I'm so sorry. I don't know how that happened. And they all said, no, don't worry, Father Nicholas. That was God telling us that we should have put in the better oil. It was God kind of judging us for not offering the best that we had to Him. So we should keep that spirit as we offer things to God. Now, of course, what is the real offering that we're offering now? When, as Christians, we're offering ourselves. So when we come to the divine liturgy, when we come to worship God in spirit and in truth, the best offering we have is ourselves. But we have to present ourselves pure and holy, right? Having come to God, having forgiven those who have trespassed against us, having lived holy and in chastity, having not been angry at others. That's how we make our sacrifice, our offering of our whole life unto Christ our God, a pure offering and the best that we can, right? That's why we offer the liturgy in the beginning of the day, the best hours of the day, even. That's why traditionally the liturgy is served in the morning, right? When we're still fresh and ready to worship God with all of our attention. So, so that's where I want to end off tonight, to show that the writings of the prophets, although they can be very difficult, and some of the imagery is difficult, it still is very relevant to our life. That our relationship with God is a spousal relationship between husband and wife, but God is the one who's more faithful. Um, that although we go through immense difficulties and tragedies and political wars, like it was then in Lachish, for example, and it is today with all the troubles, God ultimately has established for us a king who is eternal and um, who gives us peace not of this world, but a heavenly peace. And just like um, God required in the Old Testament that people give the best, we as Orthodox Christians should be offering the best that we can, especially ourselves. So I hope that inspires you to read more of the prophets. Next week, we've got the prophet Daniel, which is an amazing book. In fact, it's got so much, we might have to do 2 days, but amazing imagery. We'll look at why Jesus Christ called himself the Son of Man. It comes from actually the book of Daniel. The whole story of the three youths in the furnace, and who was the mysterious fourth person that redeemed them from that furnace, what that symbolizes and what that's a type of. And we'll look at the Ancient of Days in the apocalyptic image of Daniel. So many amazing images that are so clearly speaking about Christ. It's actually shocking. I had to reread some of the verses because I was so amazed at how close it is kind of revealing the coming of Christ. So thank you all so much. Have a blessed evening, and God willing, I'll see you all next week. Thank you, and sorry about the long lesson.
Thank you, Father. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Thank
Let me
you,
know.
Father.
I'm still around. Thank you.